We've had our bass soaking now for 8 hours in our powdered borax solution. After 4 hours, we gave it a water change. After 8 hours, if you're not going to mount it, you would want to freeze it. But because we're actually going to start the mounting process on our bass, we can keep it out and work on it. The first step in the mounting process is to do any finish fleshing or touch-up work. That's even before we do the sizing of our form we carved. Sometimes you miss it when you're actually doing your fleshing, and you can see it a little bit better right now. See on the dorsal here, there's a little bit of meat. I'm just going to nip that away. This is the pectoral fin. As you can see, there's a little bit of meat here I want to get rid of. Again, parallel to the skin. Little end of that cleithrium bone, I just nip that away. A little bit more meat here. You look in the head cavity, you can see a little bit of meat hanging in here. I'm just going to nip that off. It comes out of the cheek. Sometimes that can hide in there on you, and you have to just come back and get it now. Okay, this is the top of the esophagus. Just going to nip any extra meat away. It's okay if you see a little bit of red here. It looks like there's just a little bit of meat. That's not going to hurt anything. That has all been cured in our borax solution. There's very little there, and that will just dry right away. Now we check this side of the esophagus, and we have a little bit of meat we need to get out. We're going to use our fish skinning knife for that. And we're just going to pull and pry a little bit of that away. We don't want to do too much work right here at the throat latch because that will tear out very easily. We do not want to tear that out. If there's a little bit of meat left there, it's okay. We're going to take our spoon and we're going to just scrape over that one more time. Take our spoon and just scrape a little bit at the pectoral bone to get a little bit of meat away. Okay, we're at the anal fin. Looks like it could be thinned down just a little bit more. Soft dorsal looks fine. The tail fin could use a little bit more opening up on these ends here, on the top and the bottom. So I'm actually going to do that by flipping the fish around. Taking my fish skinning knife, going underneath the bone, between the skin and the bone. Not all the way in, just a little bit to loosen it up a little bit so I can cut it. Same on the top a little bit. Same on this end. A little underneath, a little on top. Then I'll take my fish skinning shears and open that up just a little bit more. And what this actually does is this allows for a very clean tail juncture. If you leave a lot of bone or meat in here, you'll see it when it dries, and it just doesn't want to flare out as well as if you remove it all. So we always make sure we get all of that removed. Okay, now that's good. Last area we need to just touch up is in the eyes, in the cheek area. So we're going to do the same procedure we did when we skinned it and just try to catch any extra meat that just might be sitting in there. You'll get out a little bit, and if some of this did stay in here when we mounted it, it would be fine because it's such a small amount, but you want to have a perfectionist mindset when you're doing this. And if you do miss a little bit, it's not going to hurt anything. Okay, now same on the front eye. Sometimes the meat from inside the cavity here can find its way up into that cheek cavity when we're doing our other skinning and fleshing process. So that's why we always come back now, and you can get rid of it really easily. Again, this tool here is our modified butter knife, where we actually just ground that butter knife down into a cheeker tool. And it's not super sharp here, just a slight edge on it. Okay, I think we have everything removed. So the next step is to take it back to the sink, and we're going to just spray all this extra meat and bone out of here so it's really clean. And then we're going to start the form sizing process. Now we have to size the form that we carved into the bass. But before we do that, I just want to touch on some other potential options rather than carving your own form. If you recall, this is the form we carved here earlier while the fish was still whole. You can also buy commercial forms, and commercial forms work really good. They will handle a lot of different bass. There's not a huge variety of different poses, unfortunately, but there are quite a few bass bodies on the market, and we could have bought a good body for this bass. This is an example of a purchased body. This is a little bit bigger than this bass. We'd have to modify it if we were going to put it in this particular fish, but you can see what they look like. It's very similar to what we carved, a little bit different style, and the different makers of these forms all have their own style because these are all hand-carved forms. These are not cast off the carcass of the bass. They're always carved, and then there's molds made of those carved forms. But when you do buy these, I like to actually make a few modifications. And I'm just going to show you with the marker where I make those modifications. One thing I always do is I always open up this area right here. Sometimes you also can open it up a little bit down here. This has a tendency to push down on the top of the esophagus more than I like. Also, they have wings here. This is the upper part of the cheekbone. I just like to get rid of these wherever you see my marker line. There's just no need to have those. Sometimes on the tail they'll have little wings that come off here. Again, I normally like to take those off. This one is actually pretty good that way. Another thing you have to do is you have to get the flashing file down. It'll leave a ridge otherwise. You also need to do the same thing on the bottom seam, because this is a two-part mold that goes together to make this form. So you have to get rid of that. And before you can actually mount on it, you have to rough the form up. And again, we use that drywall sanding screen, the same screen we used when we carved our form. And I just sand over the whole body with that. You don't have to go extremely deep, but you want to go in a lot of different directions so it gets scratched up. That'll give the hide glue we're going to be using something to stick to. One more option is using an artificial head. We had touched on this a little bit earlier. These work great if the head on your bass is deformed or is severely damaged. Also, some guys do use these if they want to eliminate some shrinkage, which really isn't a big deal on a largemouth. We're going to rebuild that with epoxy later. But if they want to skip that step, you could use this. It also speeds the drying process up a little bit. Instead of having to wait a week or two for the head to dry on this, you could literally finish it after a couple days. But on all the bass that go out of our shop, we actually use the natural head, and we've been doing that for almost 40 years with great results. If you were going to use an artificial head, you would want to carve your body to fit the artificial head. I actually did not do that, but it's very close, as you can see. If we were going to use it, this would work on there. And that's what it would look like. Now we have to size our form. We have to see if it's actually going to fit into the skin. If you recall from the carving video, we went about 1 inch big on our girth. We were about 1/2 inch tall, and we were about 1/2 inch wide. We were very good down by the tail. So we're going to size it out just to see what kind of seam we have. Again, the reason we don't take the measurements exact to start is because we don't want to have a form that's too small and will not work. And all the time we put into this would be for nothing. So it's much better to have the form being just a little bit bigger, size it, and then take a little bit down after we size it. So we're going to put it in. This is the show side, going towards the show side of the bass. I'm going to slip it right in that top head cavity up here. Make sure it's lining up. You can see where the tail is lining up there. Another quick note, we do have quite a bit of curve here, and we want to be careful as we're sizing that we don't press down here and break it, because it can break in this section. If you're at all concerned about that during the sizing process, you can put a wad of paper towels underneath the skin, between the skin and the table, and that'll protect the form from breaking. But we're going to be careful right now. Just bringing the skin around. Okay, this is almost a perfect fit. As you can see, we've got about an inch gap right here, maybe an inch and a quarter, and then it goes a little bit less down here. It might seem like it's just a little big at this point, but after we have our hide glue on and we sew this and pull those stitches 3 times, your seam's going to be down to this, which is going to be almost a perfect seam. So there's no need to do any real modifications here. We do check under here, make sure there's plenty of room for our gills, and there is, as you can see. You also open your mouth and you make sure the gills aren't going to hit anywhere, and they're not. You also want to make sure that you don't have too much form here that you have to pull your tail down and to try to get it around the form. And again, we don't. You can see it's loose here. So it looks like we have a good fit, but we do need to flip it around to see what it looks like on the show side. So yeah, you can see it's starting to look like a bass now again. So we open the mouth and that looks nice. We check our alignment points. The pelvic fins are in the correct area. The dorsal looks good. Soft dorsal is in the correct spot. Anal fin's correct. We have the right dip here at the gut. And we check our tail. That looks nice. Take a quick look at the head everywhere. Everything's looking good there. So looks like we have a really nice fit. Now if you had the mouth jacked super wide open, we might even want it to have a little wider up here. But I'm not going to have it jacked that far open. We're going to have it at about 3/4, kind of an open mouth, but more of a natural looking pose. And then you have the correct alignment at our throat latch. One quick note too on the throat latch area, which is right here. You can actually carve your form so it goes all the way up and touches the throat latch, but I find that it actually is a little restricting during the mounting process, and it's much easier just to rebuild that area with a little bit of epoxy rather than trying to carve all the way up into it. So that's why you don't see a lot of form right here. So it looks like we don't have to do any modifications, so we're going to flip the bass back over and we're going to commence with putting a wood block in the back, or our hanger block. Even though this foam is fairly durable, I need to strengthen up the tail area because, as you can see, it's fairly thin. To do that, I'm going to put a wire in. This is like a 12 gauge wire. 14 gauge will also work. Put it right into the end. I'm just going to press it forward, take it down onto my workbench, finish it off so it's flush. You don't want any part of that sticking out. So you can see it's all buried in. Now we need to put a wood block into the fish. Now the reason we do that is as we put this on a piece of driftwood or put a hanger block on the back for hanging on the wall, we need something to anchor into. You can't just anchor into the foam. There are methods you can use with wood dowels where you usually drill out big holes into the foam and try to bond that into place, but I don't recommend that. You want to have some structure in that foam. So we're going to use a piece of 1/4 inch plywood to do that. So what we do is we put the back of the fish up. So this is the show side, it's against the bench. Put some paper towels down here to protect it. Take my block. I'm going to find the point about, in this case we're about 3 to 4 inches back from the cleithrium bone area on the fish body. Kind of at like a center point on the fish. If we put it here and we put it onto our driftwood or on our hanger block, at this point you'll have a nice head out and tail out. If it's too far up here, then your tail will be coming into the wall and vice versa. So we want to have it right here in the center. Take my fish skinning knife and I'm just going to trace out the pattern where this block is. I'm not cutting real deep right now, I just want to make some marks. Okay, I can see where my block's going to be. Now I need to cut it in. We're going to be cutting in here about 1 inch. You don't have to go to the center of the foam here at all. Just so it's under the surface is fine. That is normally about that much where my finger is to the end of the fish skinning knife. Not such a big deal on largemouth, but on smaller fish, you have to be very careful you don't cut through to the show side. Okay, now the profile has been cut out of that block. Now we just need to checker it so we can actually break this foam out. So we're making the same depth cut. Okay, we take our fish skinning knife, going on the edge, start breaking it towards the center. You can see how we start removing it. You can just kind of loosen it up as you go. We just come in with our knife then, and just going to kind of clean it up to make sure our block will sit in here correctly. And we test our block, make sure it'll fit in. And it does. We put it back on our paper towels to protect the show side. You can see I'm always trying to protect the show side, protect the tail at all times. Now we're going to put a fast set antler mache over our block to hold it in place. We're also going to use the fast set antler mache to do the fill in the back cheek of the bass. I'll explain why we do that more later during the mounting process. It'll become very clear why we do it. We're not going to do the front side at this time, just the back side. Also, we are not going to set the eyes in the bass until after it's mounted and dried. We do not do it during the mounting process. There's too much of a chance of distortion and the eye being wrecked while we're trying to mount it. So we always do that after. This is fast set antler mache. You can get this from Mackenzie Taxidermy Supply. It sets up in about 5 minutes. To fill in this area here and to do that eye, we're going to need about 2 handsful to 2.5 handsful of the fast set. I'm just going to put that into a dry container, no water at this point. I'm going to take some cold water, put a little bit in, start to mix it up. Like I could use just a little bit more water. So put a little more in. You want it to be fairly easy to smooth out. Okay, so now we're going to take some of this, just put it right over the block. We want to get as smooth as we can, but you don't have to worry about getting it perfectly smooth. We're going to come back and do that shortly. Actually take a little bit of your water. Just put that on your hand, just a little bit. That'll actually help you to smooth it out more. We'll actually be coming back and sanding this after it's about 3/4 set up. Now we need to put some in the eye of the bass. So to do that, it's going to use our index finger and just push it right in. It's okay if you get some on the outside of the bass's head. We're going to just spray that off after it starts to set up. We're just going right in through the eye socket. We're pushing it between the skin and that cheekbone to just fill up that cavity. We do not want to overfill these fish eyes at all. Fish eyes are actually fairly flat. So I'm just going to take my thumb and just kind of smooth it out so it's fairly flat. Now we just let this set up for about 5 minutes. And then you can come back with a little bit more water, spread out a little bit more, and then we'll actually come through and sand it really smooth and spray it off this bass's head.